Thompson, but it's a question for all of you as we will go rotating through it. The education system in South Carolina, we have, or seem to have, on the one hand, the General Assembly seemingly all-powerful in a lot of respects, and local school boards that are fiercely and jealously guarding their turf. So what is the most important role for the state superintendent of education, and how are you fit for that? Mr. Thompson?
I think the most important role for the state superintendent of education is to be the advocate for public education in the state. I think the state superintendent has to fight for all resources available for the state and for the children in the districts, and for a high quality education as opposed to a minimally adequate education. The reason why I'm the best candidate is that I have over 34 years of experience in education as a high school math teacher, principal, University of South Carolina employee in the Department of Educational Leadership, State Department of Education employee, and graduate school dean at South Carolina State University. So I'm in the unique position that I've not only practiced leadership, but I've taught those who are practicing leadership in the school districts in this state.
Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll piggyback on what Tom said and add, as a teacher, classroom teacher of 30+ years, I understand the dealings that our school boards have. They are at the most local level, and they have our immediate children at heart. They have our teachers, and then when we come to the General Assembly, this is where we actually have our biggest concern, because they don't seem to see what our school boards see. So I would like for us to be more than just advocates for and with the General Assembly. I believe we have a big job ahead with the General Assembly in order to bring them around to where our school boards are, because our school boards understand the value of that dollar, and I'm not sure that our legislative body does.
Candidates. Next question is from Gina Smith, and started with Ms. Gallagher.
Gotcha. South Carolina Democrats have long pushed for more state funding for school districts, particularly poor rural ones. Our Republican governor, Nikki Haley, has got an education initiative included in both the House and Senate budget that would partially accomplish this goal. Do you agree with this Republican-backed reform? Ms. Gallagher.
I think the governor has come a long way. It may have taken her 3 years to get there. But what we are looking for with these programs that she is suggesting, or these initiatives, has to do with the funding issue. Our rural areas are much different from our urban areas, and what they need is different, and I'm not sure her plan has addressed that altogether. Again, though, the funding is the problem for being sure that you're going to have more classroom teachers, you're going to have more educational support professionals in these areas if you're going to attempt to promote what her program is.
I fully endorse the governor's stance on public education, but I don't think it goes far enough. I understand that she is in favor of early childhood education. I don't think she goes far enough in that area. I would like to introduce the concept of birth to kindergarten, early childhood education. Not so that we get our small babies in school, but so that we begin as a public school district, public school system, to work with the parents to make sure that children are ready for public school when they get to kindergarten. They need the kinds of experiences that are rich and rewarding in the home, as well as the parents need the resources to make sure that they're able to provide the kinds of experiences that are needed. I strongly believe, and I know that if we get them at kindergarten ready to learn, we can give them a high quality education.
Next question is from Rachel Southmaid, and starting with Mr. Govan.
This is a question that comes directly from teachers and principals here in South Carolina. How would you structure a teacher evaluation plan to fairly and accurately assess our state's educators?
We talk about practical experience. I've evaluated teachers for the past 30 years. I am in a position now as a specialization coordinator for Walden University, which is situated in Minneapolis, but is online, has online programs. And part of my job as a coordinator is administrative, and I not only teach, but I supervise employees, and I have to administer Walden's personnel employee evaluation system. So I've evaluated employees for the past 30 years. But being that what it is, I think what the teachers are most concerned about right now is this value added concept, that their evaluation will be based on student performance. I think that has to be part of it, but right now it seems that a percentage that is allocated for that is much too high. So we have to be a lot more reasonable. Teachers are hired to make a difference, and I think evaluation has to include that.
Ms. Gallagher.
Thank you, sir. The evaluation plan for South Carolina is the ADEPT program. It also involves the SAFE-T. It could be the GBE, the goals-based evaluation, which some more experienced teachers would be on. We need an evaluation system which will give us the weaknesses and the strengths of our teachers. If you know those strengths and those weaknesses, you have a good plan out there before you. You can also see that it must be efficient, it has to be effective, it's got to be reliable, and most important, it's got to be accountable. We want teachers in the classroom that are going to be effective with our students, and the only way to do that, I was part of the ADEPT program, and I was an evaluator with ADEPT, and it's very important to be able to get those strengths and weaknesses out there for those teachers. You're trying to encourage people to stay in the classroom, and of course those that maybe would not fit, to help them leave. But the most important thing is that it is accountable to the public, so that the public understands we have the best in our schools.
Let me start the next round with Mr. Belton. Very straightforward question. How would you address failing schools as superintendent of education? Is it a state responsibility, and when do you step in?
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
As superintendent of education, I strongly believe that all children can learn and all schools can be excellent schools if given the right resources and in the right environment. I think that, yes, the state is responsible for failing schools. They're responsible to help failing schools. I think one of the problems that we have right now is that our schools are being underserviced by the Department of Education, to the extent that relationships between the state superintendent of education and superintendents and principals is practically non-existent. I think in order to solve issues regarding failing schools, we need to take a collaborative approach with the system as a whole, so that we exert collaborative, positive energy together towards addressing the issues that our failing schools have.
Ms. Gallagher.
Sir, I think one of the most important things we're going to have to do is to engage our parents, engage the communities where we have these failing schools. That community knows their own problems, and we can help them by addressing those problems in the schools. Many times it's a lack of resource. They are the classrooms where we have teachers that come and go after a couple years because the teachers are not fully engaged in that community. So that becomes a top priority. What the State Department has to do is to go down there and help, not just step in, but be there as mentors and be there to engage these teachers as well into their classrooms. We need to provide more opportunity for these students once they are in high school and they are opportunity to go to tech or guidance. They got to see what their future is. It would also help if we had really good quality after-school programs that would help them.
Go.
I'd like to go back to Mr. Belton's point about choice schools, not just when it comes to struggling schools, but also when it comes to charter schools, and wondering what you all think about choice and charter schools and the current system that we have set up, or how you'd like to see it evolve.
I am not in favor of any structure that removes resources from public schools. I think our public schools are the foundation for our communities and for our economic development system in the state. So I think we have to first concentrate on making our public education system as strong as we possibly can before we look at other entities. But now, in terms of options within the public school system, yes, I, as state superintendent, I'd be more than willing, the first day that I'm state superintendent, to say every school district needs to have public options for children and their families so that children can and families can have options for students to get their needs met. They may be interested in STEM education, so there needs to be something available for children in those areas. They may be interested in art or music. There needs to be options available.
I would support any type of public charter schools because the public dollars need to stay within the public realm. I would not support having our parents and our students jumping around from district to district or school to school. I think we're going to hurt our diversity that really brings you a true public education in our schools. We have to have an opportunity, and I think charter schools will do that, to allow our students different from what is on the books of how we want to run our schools. And that's what a charter school gives us the opportunity to do. And I think when we go just a step farther from the STEM is to go to STEAM, the science, technology, mathematics, engineering, as well as the arts. That will make the biggest difference, I think, and within our own public schools, not necessarily having to go to a charter school.
That's the next question, and we'll start with Ms. Gallagher.
Okay. Ms. Gallagher, you've said that the legalization of marijuana to pay for public education should be put before voters. You've gotten some pushback on that, I think, from Dr. Belton included. Many view marijuana as a dangerous gateway drug. Do you still support the idea, and what do the other candidates think on the issue?
Yes, I still support the idea of looking at a referendum on the legalization of marijuana. I think we have approximately 2 years if we do a referendum. So you have time for a data-driven discussion on the pros and cons and weigh those pros and cons. You can look at what's happening in the state of Washington as well as in Colorado as to see over that 2-year period, is this going as well as we think it is? We have lack funding in our public schools basically because the General Assembly hasn't funded it. I think we have to not begin looking at marijuana as the gateway drug. If you really become up to date on our drugs, you find out that our problem is really not the marijuana. Our problem is what's sitting in our medicine cabinets. And too many of our students have figured out what to do with those medicines to turn them in to get a high. We also have the ability of tobacco, alcohol, also become very offensive to trying to promote a good a quality lifestyle for our students.
Thompson.
Matching, there are certain things, some things that just shouldn't be matched. And I think public education and marijuana is one of them. I can't vision having a situation here in South Carolina where we say, buy marijuana so we can have high quality schools. That just doesn't make sense to me either. If we're going to fund public education, again, yes, like Dr. Belton indicated, we need a stable fund. So we need to work together with the legislature to make sure that the funding for public education has a stable base so that school districts know what to expect from year to year, know what they're going to have so that they can plan appropriately. Marijuana and as Mr. Govan indicated, other sin taxes and even the sales taxes, they are not stable taxes and they do not do the job for public education.
A lot of what we're talking about here is revolving around money. There's no question about that. How it's collected, how it's allocated, what resources there might be, and several of you have addressed this in a variety of ways. I'd like to stay on that subject and starting with Mr. Govan, if it's not marijuana, if it's not federal money, and some people would say it should be federal money, where do you find the funds that are lacking? Have you got one thing you can put your finger on? Ms. Thompson.
Our financing system in South Carolina is not that difficult to understand. The base student cost that's included in the EFA is a fairly straightforward formula. I used to teach it when I taught education finance at the University of South Carolina. What is important is that the base student costs formula that is there, as Mr. Govan has indicated, has never been fully funded. That is why we have the discrepancies that we have in our public education system. if the issue is money, and yes, and the issue is how the legislature gets the money, I'd be willing to stand here and say right now, give us another penny, give us 2 pennies. If you can't hinge it on property taxes and we have to settle for the sales tax, put an additional 2 pennies in there for public education.
Ms. Gallagher?
Yes, sir. Our first issue is going to be the engagement of our parents and our communities in this issue. But you have to go back to the days of when we had video poker, and video poker was taken off the table, and that took dollars away from all public agencies. Then along came Act 388, and Representative Govan was a fighter not to have that happen, but it happened, and it does need to change. I think we have to look at what we pay in our taxes as what we do when we think about our churches when we do tithing. I think our taxes are a tithing to our communities, and I think we need to start looking at it like that. We also have to be sure that the public understands there are other tax exemptions out there. It doesn't matter what kind of car you get, it's only $300. You can get a Learjet for $300 on taxes. I think we have a little problem with doing something about these issues on our tax exemptions. We also have to look at the fact that the public does not quite understand the lottery that was passed a few years back, that lottery is for scholarships, and that it does not really go towards the public school except for a very small amount.
Thank you. Gina Smith, questions starting with Mr. Belton.
South Carolina, like the rest of the nation, will soon face a teacher shortage exacerbated by all the baby boomers who are retiring, including my mother. What would you do as superintendent to recruit new teachers during this challenging time of high-stakes testing and low pay?
Mr. Thompson.
You know, I'm not quite sure I understand Dr. Belton's position. He seems to be against sales tax, but he seems to be against reverting to property tax to fund public education. So where's the money going to come from? We need to fully fund the base student cost, and the money needs to come from somewhere. So we need to make a decision, where's the best place for it to come. In terms of recruiting teachers, recruiting and retaining teachers, we need to make the teaching profession much more attractive for particularly new and young teachers. We need to change the way we train teachers, first of all, so that they are better prepared for entering the classroom, and then pay them for what they're worth. We need to show teachers how valuable they are to the system. And I would be willing, as state superintendent, to talk with or work with school districts to make sure that bringing new teachers into the districts, particularly our poor rural districts, will be something that they can do to talk about things that they can do that will help to attract those teachers and retain them in those districts.
Thank
a
you,
lot of it has to do with the socialization of those teachers into the system, and there are things that we can do.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, sir. We need to recruit and to retain teachers we have. Maybe we can even convince your mother to stay. One of the things that you have to do is be sure that you have the assistance that teachers needs. Too many times we don't have the workbooks, we don't have the material that teachers need in order to have a great classroom. And they go out and they spend their own dollars. So again, we're back to funding and the resources that are needed in the immediate classroom. We also have to decide that in our pre-K through third grade, those classes are made smaller, and that we always have some type of assistant or teacher's aide in there to work with our teachers. I can't think of anything more challenging than dealing with the little people in a classroom. The most important thing, though, is to look at the fact that testing does not make a judgment on any teacher in any year, nor does it do anything for any student at any one time. Testing is just there for that time to let you know to move on from there. Now, some tests are much better and much more progressive in what they give that teacher in her response to her classes, but most of the time, high testing, no. That doesn't really judge on what that teacher does that year.
Mr. Govan.
I can't believe we've gotten this far into it without bringing up the word Common Core, or the words Common Core. What do you see as the future of the Common Core state standards in South Carolina, particularly given recent legislative indication that we might start to move away from it?
I predict that we'll start moving back towards a Common Core. We have in our educational system, we have to increase the rigor that is there, that is absent now, so that we are sure that we can graduate students who are prepared for the workforce or whatever their next step is after graduation, college, military, whatever. And the Common Core standards were going to do that. The sad part about this whole Common Core thing is that we've had districts around the state that have been working for 2-3 years in preparing for Common Core, and the teachers have gotten excited in those districts about Common Core because they see the possibilities that are there, moving away from fact testing to problem solving. And they are very disappointed that we've taken the stand towards the Common Core that we have. I think Common Core will be good for our schools, and I foresee it coming back.
I'm going to piggyback on everything that Dr. Thompson just said, and then also mention the fact that this was an example of the State Department and just very specifically the Superintendent of Education backing off of what had been promised to the classroom teachers. You're going to work on Common Core, then you're going to work with this test out there, and let's see how well we do and where our strengths and weaknesses are in our classrooms. And he on his own decided that we were no longer going to worry about Common Core because he wasn't going to have the Smarter Balance test. That's a major blow to your classrooms when that's what they're looking for. Common Core is basically standards. Doesn't matter what grade you're at, you want to meet, doesn't matter what the discipline is, you want to meet that. And if you don't meet that at whatever grade level, then if you're at the 3rd grade, you don't meet those standards, how are you going to do well in the 4th grade? And the same thing moves on. So Common Core, it's a set of standards. It has gotten a bad rap out there, and we need to do a better discussion that should have come from the Department of Education on what Common Core was.
So, by way of keeping time, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that Gina and Rachel each have another shot at you. So, Gina.
There's been a lot of talk this legislative session about 4K. Should we expand it? Should we expand it to just certain groups? Should it be universal? But Republicans have pointed out time and time again that research is really split, that 4K is not necessarily an indicator of a student's likelihood of long-term success. What do y'all think? What do y'all make of the research about 4K, and what do you think South Carolina should do?
Well,
whose turn is it?
I'm not sure, but I'll be happy. I'll be happy.
Ms. Gallagher's turn.
Pre-K, definitely. The more that you can have our children come in, most of the time it is not a full day, it's a half day. It's that whole beginning process of socialization with children, the beginning of them sitting down and understanding what they're learning from just their little peers. It's not all play. And the whole process of this is education. This is something that will make me better. We have to keep improving with our students. And so the whole idea that earlier that we can, and I don't mean from birth, I know you're on birth thing, but the sooner we can get them, the sooner we can get them into these classrooms and into that setting and into that mode of enjoying learning and being successful in learning, that's going to make all the difference. So yes, I think it is important.
No, I've been chomping at the bit to answer this question. Because I'll go you one better. As I indicated before, I strongly support the concept of birth to kindergarten. I think the research that you're talking about says that the advantage that the pre-K students get over those that didn't do pre-K gets wiped out about 3rd grade. So my proposal is that if we start at birth, providing the kinds of experiences that children need over that developmental period to be prepared for kindergarten, then everybody's on a level playing field so that we move along together, so we don't have to worry about wiping out the benefit of early childhood education. So I think that birth to kindergarten is the right way to go.
Thank you. Next question, Rachel, starting with Mr. Kovan.
One of the greatest roles of the superintendent of education is to bridge the gap between what happens at the state level and what happens at the local level. Not because of your background and because of your past experience, but what will you do if elected to effectively bridge that gap, not just for parents, but for everyone in the community?
Mr. Thompson?
I'd like to introduce a concept called aggressive engagement that pretty much opens the doors of the schools to the community, for the community to come in and for the students to go out. Aggressive engagement means having the community embrace the school, where parents are welcome, businesses are welcome, they're welcome there every day to help, to assist, to participate in the educational process and the operation of the school. I think when parents are there, when the community embraces a school, the children feel safer, they feel better about their school, they do better. When children are involved in the community in a reciprocal process, involved in meaningful projects, they learn responsibility, they learn leadership, they feel better about themselves, they do better. I think that's a relationship that has mutual benefits for the community and for the school. It's good for our children, it's good for our communities.
Ms. Gallagher?
Yes, sir. We have to advocate for all of our public schools, and that means we're advocating for all of our educators. The most important person in our classroom are our students, and so we're advocates for them because they really don't have a voice in whatever political scene is going on. But for us to make that change, it's going to take engagement within the communities, time with them, and that is one of the jobs of the superintendent, is to go out into the communities. It is to work very strongly with our superintendents of education. The majority of them are elected by school boards, which are elected by the people in that community. And also to be sure that we have our teachers included in leadership roles at the State Department as well as in our local school districts. And I think we're going to find a major change when we do that.
We have a little less than 2 minutes, so this is the quick round. It's going to start with Mr. Belton. Let me ask you this. There's been restructuring of government in South Carolina, particularly around the governor's office during this year. This is still one of the few statewide offices that is elected superintendent of education. Should it remain that way? And if so, why? Thompson.
Yes, it should be. It should remain an elected position. I think public education needs to have a strong advocate for the system. With it being an elected position, you don't have to apologize to the governor, you don't have to apologize to the legislature. You promote public education, and I would do it without any excuse. Public education needs to be strong. It's an economic development issue. It's a jobs issue.
Ms. Gallagher, 20 seconds.
Yes, sir. It should be an elected position because we are there for the children, and the best way to be there for the children is to have no ties to anybody else except for our children.